Mid-19th century. The cities of America look as if large-scale military operations took place in these places. Paris also does not stand out much against the background of American cities. The same destroyed houses, there are no people on the streets, despondency and desolation. Historians say that there is nothing unusual in this. In America, since the beginning of the 19th century, there have been more than 100 large-scale fires that completely burned out cities. Roughly speaking, one fire a year. The causes of the fires were different, but mostly minor. But if you look at the photos, they are not very similar to the consequences of a fire alone. Inexplicable destruction of buildings is visible, which raises many questions. As for the city of Paris, according to historians, German troops are to blame for the destruction of the city. The order to bombard Paris was given by Chancellor of Prussia Bismarck. 400 citizens were killed during the shelling. Then, the detachments of the Paris Commune seized power in the city, and during these battles, the buildings of Paris also suffered. Historians seem to explain everything very logically. In America, fires are to blame for everything. In Paris, Chancellor Bismarck and the detachments of the Paris Commune. But here's what's very strange. Empty destroyed cities are not only Paris, Chicago, Boston, New York, New Orleans, Cairo. It sounds, of course, strange, but Sevastopol should be added to the list of suspiciously destroyed cities. Of course, historians know everything about who destroyed Sevastopol. But their version also does not stand up to any serious criticism. The same applies to the cities of Egypt. Egypt in 19th century photographs looks like an abandoned area by people. And it was only in the middle of the 19th century that people returned to this area, and we see how life in abandoned Egyptian cities is just beginning to emerge. But in the history of fires and abandoned cities, for some reason, everyone bypasses such a mystical country as India. Of course, with the phrase abandoned cities of India, most have a picture from a Soviet cartoon about Mowgli. And similar stories, like in the jungle, find the ruins of unknown civilizations. Only here in India, in order to find cities of unknown civilizations, it is not necessary to go far into the jungle. It is enough to look at the photos of 1857th year, and we will immediately see a strange and wonderful world that should not be on this territory. We see ancient buildings, in which the natives, with the help of unburned bricks, arrange beaters for themselves. Almost like in the Winter Palace. There was a huge empty building, and this building was divided into small cells, mezzanines. And even the time intervals are about the same. The beaters in India and the winter mezzanine were built around the same period. Mid-19th century. I like this extension very much. It's just that some lover of primitivism attached it to an abandoned palace. It looks very strange. Why didn't the man occupy one of the rooms of the abandoned palace? I think for the same reason why the Winter Palace was divided into small mezzanines, the inability to heat a huge stone room normally. In India, after all, there are also cool months, and at night there is no frost in the houses, and therefore it is much easier to create a comfortable atmosphere with a small amount of firewood in such a small annex. And if we look at the surrounding landscape, there were problems with firewood. Or here, look at these ruins, exactly the same can be seen somewhere near St. Petersburg. And here is just a wonderful monument of architecture. Look at these collapses. It can be seen that these gates are very ancient and are already being destroyed by old age. But if you listen to the historian's version, then these gates are not destroyed from old age. They suffered from fighting during the Sepoy Rebellion. And all those buildings that I showed you earlier also began to look like this precisely because of the Sepoy uprising. Before the capture of India by the British, it was divided into a huge number of small principalities, constantly at war with each other. The British quickly occupied India, but in order to control vast territories, a large army is needed, and therefore the main force of the colonial troops became Sepoys, Indian mercenaries armed with British weapons. The Sepoys constantly paid a very substantial salary for the Indians. For the local poor, getting into the service of the British has become the subject of dreams. But the political situation in India began to deteriorate due to the short-sighted actions of the Governor-General, Lord Dalhousie. General Dalhousie introduced a law, according to which the Indian feudal lord, left without an heir, had to give his lands to the East India Company. Life in India was translated into the European manner, sati and matchmaking of children were banned. Foreign trade at the company's entrance was also prohibited. Taxes on land have increased. Also, due to the mass production of fabric in English manufactories, thousands of Indian weavers went bankrupt. The last straw that led to the uprising was a rumor that the packages with cartridges were soaked with a mixture of beef and pork fat. The Sepoy units were deliberately recruited according to a mixed principle, half Hindus, half Muslims. And since Sepoys usually tore the cardboard packaging of cartridges with their teeth, the news that the cardboard was soaked in pork and beef fat greatly offended their religious feelings and caused a mutiny. The uprising lasted only a few months. But, although the British severely suppressed the mutiny, for which they had to wait for the troops, who finished the military campaign in the Crimea, but they had to make concessions. On the 2nd of August, 1858, the English Parliament passed a law on the liquidation of the East India Company and the transfer of management to England. Historians have a wonderful version, of course, and exciting. It's just that all the formalities have been observed, the increase in taxes, the seizure of land, and of course, the insult to the feelings of believers, the use of lard to impregnate the packages of cartridges. But when I look at the Delhi Gate, which allegedly suffered during the assault, I see a completely dilapidated structure that has suffered more from old age and not from some Sepoy uprising. And if there was a shelling of these gates, it was long before the coming of the British. Look at the ruins of Chadgar Mansal, or Umbrella Palace. Firstly, the Umbrella Palace has a very wonderful name, and secondly, we see the same destruction in American cities. The next photo is like an illustration on the topic of buried cities. And here is just a reminder of the arsenals of New York. The architecture is identical, only these buildings are located on different continents. Here, we see just a copy of the Pyrenesia engraving, a beautiful building with high passages, the Zemsti adapted for their needs. Although according to historians, this building was built in 1837th year, so it stood for only 20 years. And these gates are less than 10 years old, since they were built in 1848th year. If you repaint this photo in the right color, and put a cross on the temple, then you might think that this place is located in St. Petersburg, like the courtyard of the Peter and Paul Fortress, with a view of the cathedral. This photo is also somewhat reminiscent of Pyrenesia's work. And this one is a ruined city that was abandoned several decades ago, and people have just begun to restore order in it. The destroyed tower of the crematorium and the buried floor. Historians say that these are the consequences of one uprising. Even the trees on the roofs grew, although the uprising lasted only a few months. This is also a wonderful view. This is what India looked like before the arrival of the British. Also very interesting are these decorations, somewhat similar to the sun, but the whole structure looks like it was recently discovered. And this is actually either a palace or a train station with buried floors. Here is another interesting structure with a strange object on the tower. Almost all the photos in this series which date back to 1857th year, raise a lot of questions. Let's take this one. If you post it on a website dedicated to the fire in Boston, then no one will single it out from a series of Boston photos. Look at these photos for yourself, the link under the video, and you can guess for yourself what happened in India, and is there a connection with the events in America and Paris? I think there is a connection. And the destroyed cities of India, fires in America, revolutions in Paris, are the consequences of one global event that occurred in the early or mid-19th century. This event can be called in different ways: the First World War, the Second Settlement of the World, the arrival from behind the ice wall. There may be many names, but they are all connected with one event: the almost simultaneous destruction of cities on all continents, and the disappearance of the population of these cities. That's it. Watch my channel.